Well, thank you so much for inviting me to the whole organization team. It's a privilege to speak to you this afternoon. And today I'm going to talk about one of the private sector implementations of self-sovereign identity. And that is with the IATA travel pass. So we consider it a case study of how an organization can bring their business requirements. It's not a technical POC. It's not a project. It's not a government initiative. It's an actual project to actually deploy to millions of customers. So let me talk through the project and how we got there, where we are today. So I will talk about 5 things. Number 1, the project to deliver the travel pass and where it came from. Number 2, how we considered the project and how we think about developing the solution. Number 3, where we are today. Number 4, the benefits of this approach. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. So just for those who might have joined, I'm going to cover the IATA travel pass, the background, the considerations for the project, where we are today, the progress, the benefits of our approach, and the challenges we had. So firstly, when COVID appeared, I don't need to spend too much time on this, but the world stopped, and specifically air travel stopped. And because governments said, well, we don't want anyone to visit our country, many airlines, they literally had to ground all the planes. So all the airports were full of planes like a car park, just standing around. And sometimes whole airports closed down. And this caused a real heart attack, a real commercial challenge for the industry. The air travel industry does not make lots of money, and they need people flying a lot, and they need lots of people on planes, even just to break even. So this was a very significant problem for the industry, and they turned to travel credentials, and specifically health credentials, to say, how can we know that the people who are getting on our planes do not have COVID? And that is supporting the public health measures. Now, not everyone has a mobile phone. Not everyone has the internet. It needs to work offline. It needs to work in all situations, in all languages. And so the simple place to start is paper. And so very quickly, hospitals and testing labs turned to producing paper certificates. And that worked for a short time, but it caused an awful lot of problems. The first problem was that we have to carry it with all the other documents we have, and I can only share the specific information on my PDF, on my paper. And that's a problem because I can't, in the early days of the pandemic, there were many people turned away at the airport because they had the wrong signature or the wrong attribute, or they were missing a piece of information. So the only data you could share from the paper was what's on the paper. Number 2, huge queues. There were 5-6 hour long queues at the airport because of all this identity and paper checking. For some airlines and some systems, they were able to upload. I could take a photo. And so it was a bit difficult or clumsy. It was nearly impossible to check that the data really came from the source that people claimed. And as this audience will understand, easy to forge. I can just go to Photoshop, change my document. And there were even exchanges, people selling these documents. So the community said, let's turn them digital. Well, that means either we need a big database of all the world's health certificates. Some argued that that's not practical. We should put it on a blockchain. But of course, that's a terrible idea. Putting personal data on a blockchain is a terrible idea because of privacy, because of scalability, because of being locked into one particular solution. And the whole world said, well, there are big privacy problems. And actually, airlines don't want your health data. They don't want my COVID status any more than they want my HIV status. It's a really big problem for them. People say, oh, GDPR, but actually the airlines only collect my passport because the government makes them. So they really want to only collect a minimum amount of data, and suddenly the whole air industry and travel everywhere is asked to collect this very complex, sensitive personal data. So the answer was to put the data on our mobile phones. We turned paper into digital. And specifically what everyone did was turn the data on paper into a QR code and put the data inside the QR code. So it's actually readable. But this brings problems too. Number one, I can, when I share the data, you get everything from the QR code, but it's only what's in there. So we still have the same problem we had with paper. You've got to share all the data. With these QR codes, how do you know it's Jamie's QR code? How do you know it's mine? Well, what they did is they added first name, last name, date of birth to the QR code so that I could carry around my passport and say, oh, look, it's my QR code. And so we've got to share all the data, which means you can have my date of birth, even if you're just checking, do you have a COVID certificate? Yes or no. Suddenly you know how old I am, which is too much information. It requires me carrying an additional document. And of course, to make it traceable, these QR codes had unique identifiers within them to say, oh, we know this one came from this lab for Jamie. But if it's unique, it's globally traceable, which means everywhere I share it, I leave a digital footprint. We still have the same customer experience. Maybe I've got my QR code for my boarding pass, my QR code for my health certificate. I've got my passport. I've got a passenger locator form. All of this information is now clumsy, or maybe I have a paper one here, and hold on 1 minute. I'll get my QR code, and it got very clumsy still. And of course, either I have this upload event. How do I get the QR code? Well, I have to scan something or go somewhere, and then I share it face to face, and it works maybe face to face. I can have my QR code can be scanned, but it's still not the perfect situation. And if you think about it, airlines, they cannot issue a boarding pass until they've seen your passport and your COVID certificate. And so they have to check you face to face, because otherwise, how do I know it's not someone else's QR code? And finally, how do I know who's asking for the data? So this isn't to do with SSI. This wasn't to do with, oh, we must have a digital wallet. We're going to do a POC. This wasn't about we must have DIDs and DIDs. This was real business problems because airlines were losing tens of millions of dollars every day. Some airlines had to fire, had to cut the workforce by 50%. So people were losing their jobs. So the International Air Transport Association, IATA, is the body that represents, over 300 airlines. And they do things like they set the standards for boarding passes. And they say, what does check-in look like? How do we standardize data for baggage? It's a not-for-profit, but it's a standards body. And so the airlines were having a very difficult time. And they turned to IATA saying, what will we do? And many private sector solutions were emerging to solve COVID certificates with QR codes, but they were private, they were proprietary, meaning they belonged to one company only. And so IATA said, well, we're here to represent the interests of members. And at the same time, IATA, the International Air Transport Association, already had a program, an initiative called One ID. How can we create an identifier that's private for passengers globally? So this happened, this has been going for years. And so the opportunity became saying, well, how can we use IATA, use the One ID initiative and create a portable traveler ID? And so that's what this program became, to create a travel pass. But not just to put my COVID certificates in there, not just a travel pass, to put anything in there, any data. Now we'll come on to verifiable credentials in 1 minute. But that was the intention. This is not about a health pass. This is not just about creating a vaccine passport. It was never about that. It's actually about having a digital wallet for passengers in which I can put my visa, I can put my boarding pass, I can put my car rental agreement, I can put my insurance, and yes, I can put my COVID test. So that's what we did. And so our company, Avast, then known as Evanim, we helped IATA create a digital wallet. So we used our mobile digital solution, and we worked with organizations to issue and verify credentials, and I'll explain that in a minute. But it meant that individuals could only share what they needed. So they could say, do you have a COVID test? Yes or no. You don't need to know where it came from. You just need to know that it's come from an approved source. Again, the airline doesn't need to know. They don't want to know which lab I went to in Paris, which specific COVID test I received in Seoul. What they need to know is, was it approved, yes or no? Now, some governments, the government need to know the precise details for their own records, but that is not the airline. And we'll talk about that in a minute. It enabled you to share different data from different sources. I can bind the COVID information, but also my visa information, also my boarding pass information to an identity document, which means I can prove that the COVID test or the COVID vaccine was issued to Jamie and only Jamie. We have sophisticated protocols now, which those interested in the technology chat can go and find out about, but it means that we can provide anti-correlation technology, which means I don't leave unique fingerprints, unique breadcrumbs when I present my credential. We can get rid of all the forms, and we can share the data remotely. And this is, again, I'm into business requirements. This is not technology. At Avast, we believe in SSI, this whole wonderful world. Technology is maybe 25% of the answer, maybe. Everyone's very excited about the technology because it's new. But actually, this is about business requirements. It's about policy. It's about outcomes. And one outcome for IATA and the airlines, the airline doesn't want to check you when you arrive at the airport. That creates congestion, queues, waiting, problems. They need to get people through the airport as fast as possible. So actually, I want to share my data before I've left my apartment. Well, how do I do that? I can't do that with a QR code, or if I I've got to scan something and it gets complicated. Really, their requirement was, well, one tap. Why can't passengers please share your data in advance? Okay, shared. And it must be secure and private. Now, Evanim's model and Avast model has been to date that the data is on the device. This is really important. Our solution, our approach, means that the data is not being stored anywhere in the cloud. This is not a cloud wallet. It's an on-device wallet. IATA, from a policy point of view, wanted to go further and said, we actually don't want a backup of the phone. That means the passport is issued to me, the COVID test is issued to me as a credential. I hold it on my phone. If I lose my phone, I have to get a new phone and go back to all the issuers and get all the credentials all over again. And that means there's no central backup, even encrypted, of anything. It is literally as at the edge as possible. Okay. There are many other people who are much more expert than I am, including Kalia on the next call you'll hear on the panel, who can talk about the other health passes and approaches. And the Good Health Pass initiative was set up to specifically think about interoperability and the design of these passes. We moved from credentials, which is what is the data, to a pass, which is what are you allowed to do. And all the other health passes took the QR code approach, and it's been pragmatic. It's been scalable because the data is in a QR code. It means I can print it. It's practical. It got people flying really quickly. But these organizations on the page here have the same challenges about traceability, correlation, clumsy customer experience. It can only contain specific data. I must share all the data. So they've done something fantastically important, including Microsoft and the smart health cards, fantastically important to get air travel moving, but it cannot be a long-term solution. And the air travel organizations, they actually want a travel pass, a digital wallet, so that I can share any data, my boarding pass, loyalty information, lounge access. Disruption. I'm afraid, Jamie, your flight is delayed by 6 hours. Here is a credential that allows you into the lounge. Here is a credential that allows you to access a hotel overnight. No more paying and claiming and paper. So this is about a long-term vision for contactless, seamless travel, not about COVID. Back to One ID. So let me talk through how we got to the solution, and we can get to progress and so on. I'll go a bit more quickly so we can do questions at the end. Lots of big questions. Well, who will issue data? Which passengers? Who's requesting the data? And of course, the biggest problem was the travel requirements. What you need to get into a country were changing all the time. I'm so sorry, you have a COVID test on this QR code. You need to have it 48 hours before you travel, but you have it 72 hours. I'm afraid it's not okay. And so IATA have a solution already called Thematic. And Thematic looks up the global travel requirements. And it's been doing this for over 10 years. But before COVID, it was looking up, do you have the correct passport? When you land in a country, you must have at least 6 months on your expiry date before you leave on the date of expiry. So there's other requirements, visas. And so Thematic was upgraded to include health information. And last year, they were updating the database of COVID requirements 250 times every day, because the requirements vary by route. If I'm flying London to Seoul or Paris to Tokyo, it's different. So very quickly, I'll go through the flow, and then we'll talk about progress. So IATA would do an NFC scan of the passport using my phone on Android or iOS. They then have my biometric, and they can scan that against a selfie and a liveness check. Is it really Jamie holding the phone? I can then tell them where I am traveling, which route, and I can do that with my booking reference. I don't need to choose every route and flight and destination. I can just say, here is my booking reference, because they have the integration, it's IATA. And they can tell me instantly what I need within 2 seconds. And therefore say, hey, Jamie, you need this passport, you need these COVID tests, and you need a vaccine certificate from one of these 3 providers, not just any vaccine certificate. So I go and get those COVID tests. I go and upload my vaccine certificate. And yes, maybe I scan the QR code on the top of my certificate because it's maybe in the format that the IATA Travel Pass can integrate. So Travel Pass team have been working with governments around the world to ingest the data from these QR codes. So once IATA has it, they turn it into a verifiable credential format that has all the privacy protecting formats, signatures. Now, again, in the technologies track, they'll be talking about 4 different types of verifiable credential format. And again, in the panel, I'd love John and Kalia to talk more about the different formats and the benefits, and maybe that's holding back progress. IATA came from very clear business requirements from the airlines. We must have privacy protections. We must have selective disclosure. So it was pragmatism. We can't wait for perfect interoperability. We'll be here for 4 years. Meanwhile, airlines are losing tens of millions of dollars. So pragmatism, as well as privacy protecting standard, which we know will evolve, and I'll come on to that later. IATA turned the vaccine certificate and the COVID test into a verifiable credential based on the format that Evelyn was supporting at the time. And here's the clever bit. And this is what Good Health Pass was about. It was saying, okay, well, the travel pass now knows the credentials you have. It has your passport. It has the COVID test data or your vaccine. And it also knows the rules. So there is business logic on the app that says, do you meet the requirements before I've left my house? I don't need to go to the airport to find this out. And then IATA can do their business logic. And if I meet the requirements, they can issue me a new credential called OK to Travel. And if I can prove I'm OK to travel, then guess what? That's the credential I share to the airline. They don't want my COVID certificate. It's toxic waste for them. When it's paper, I only show it anyway. And now they have a verifiable source. We have the audit trail of what's been asked for and what's been shared. Okay to travel, yes or no? And then they can board me. In fact, if there are no other documents, maybe we'll talk about visas and so on later. But if there are no other documents that are required, they can issue me my boarding pass, just like 2019. And that means I can go straight to the gate. I can go straight to get on the plane. Everyone else has to be issued a boarding pass once they've seen your physical QR code or once they've seen your paper. And of course, because this is SSI, this model, this picture of issuers, holders, and verifiers, I can share that anywhere. That is not about IATA anymore. I can use it at the hotel. The hotel could say, hey, Jamie, you're arriving tomorrow. Would you like express check-in? Yes. Oh, well, we need to see your passport. And maybe because of our government rules, we need to see your vaccine too. So technology choices. I like to think of things very simply. I have a small brain. You know, we need to keep things safe. We need to keep things private. We need things open, and it needs to be scalable. So safe means the data is not in a big database. We know we have cryptographic signatures, which means I know where the data came from. It's private, meaning I only share the data I have to share. I only share what's required. Maybe you only need my passport number. And in our model, when you go and get your COVID test from a lab, you already share your passport. But again, they don't need to know the expiry date of my passport. They just need to know it's Jamie. So in our model, when you get a COVID test, you can share only your first name, last name, and passport number, because that's all they need. And then when they issue the COVID test as a verifiable credential and it lands in my digital wallet, IATA can say, there is already a digital passport here. I can prove cryptographically that the data that was issued to this phone that says COVID test has been issued to the same individual. It's open, which means we are not locked in. And I know that will be a big topic of the standards versus interoperability versus openness. And we know that there aren't 400 solution vendors right now. They're all perfectly interoperable. There's still a lot of debate, a lot of technical work to do on interoperability, as well as new signature schemes. But if the entire global travel ecosystem is reliant on one company, we have a very, very big problem. Think of, the airline industry it's crazy complicated. Hundreds of governments, thousands of border crossing places, hundreds of airlines, many, many different jurisdictions, many, many different data protection rules. It must be interoperable by design, and we must meet the highest level of privacy that is required anywhere. Remember, IATA sets the standards. They're not a consumer-facing app business, nor do they want to be. They set the standards for boarding passes and baggage, but they do interoperability really well. And so the solution is to say, let's, as a direction of travel, commit to interoperability, but have something that works right now. And so IATA has been working with governments and airlines and airports and travel providers, systems integrators all over the world to said, here's what we're going to use right now. And over time, we will standardize and make sure everything's perfectly interoperable. But right now it has to work and it has to scale. How many millions of credentials can we issue? This can't be in a lab proving interoperability. It can't be an innovation project. So I'll skip over this a little bit because we're short on time, but I can now put anything in my digital wallet, but I can share that data with any organization, could be my car rental, and IATA are creating like the reference implementation. Not the final one and not the only one. But that means that we should insist on business requirements, policy outcomes that require privacy, but also functional requirements like I should be able to share 2 credentials at the same time with one tap. You can have, are you over 21? Yes or no. Do you have a COVID test that meets our requirements? Yes or no. Please share your passport number. I should be able to share, are you entitled to be in this part of the airport? Yes or no. You don't need to know where I'm flying. Do you have a boarding pass for a flight that happens in the next 6 hours? Yes or no. Very, very powerful. And it's about business requirements, not about technology. All of which means we can do this without phoning home. Can you imagine having a system where the airport in Tokyo needs to connect with every COVID test lab in the world? It would be crazy. So we need data portability, and it's got to run on the same rails, but we should be able to verify the data instantly without having to phone home to every issuer. My example I always talk about is when I use my driving license to prove my age, the organization asking doesn't need to call the driving license at the government, the driving license department. It would be crazy if they did, or crazy if they had to, not least because every one of these issuers, these organizations, they would have to have a service that was available 24/7, that operated very, very efficiently. It's lots of overhead, lots of cost. And with this approach, and I won't go into all the technology of it, which is still being standardized, by the way, and which is still being normalized so that we can have interoperability. We're not there yet. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. We have principles, we have business requirements. An open standard for air travel is critical. This isn't about a staff passport where I am the issuer and I am the verifier. And it's not about KYC for a bank where it's a closed ecosystem still. If I prove my address to open a bank account, I can't get it from Jamie's water company. It's got to come from one of the approved issuers. And in a global ecosystem, that list of issuers is massive, thousands. And so we must have open standards so that every organization can choose their own vendor. The COVID test lab can choose their solution. Jamie can choose his app, his wallet. The airline can choose theirs, or they could build from the open source, or they can integrate with their existing systems integrator. And I know for the experts in the audience, I'm skipping over some really thorny problems like trust registries. How do I know it's an approved issuer? And we'll come on to that in 1 minute. But this is the ecosystem we created. Evanim's solution, now a vast solution, has powered it. So IATA use our verifiable credential exchange software called Verity. For the labs, they've been using Verity, but also an application we call Verity Flow, which is a web-based portal. So no coding, no integration. All done on a tablet or a PC. I can just log in, start issuing credentials. And I can request a passport, for example. Check it matches the sample we took when you came in for the test. We have a mobile SDK that powers the digital wallet, that powers the Travel Pass app. So IATA built the app. They've done the user experience. They have their own team. We, as Avast, as Evanim, have been the digital wallet inside. And the verifiers, so airlines, governments, border authorities, are working with IATA to be able to receive the credentials. But I mentioned earlier, being able to share it in advance, that is really important. So actually what happens is the individual, when they have their credentials, they're okay to travel, because it knows where I'm flying and when, 24 hours before I fly, can say, hey, you're flying to Berlin tomorrow. You are flying to Jakarta tomorrow. Do you want to share your credentials with the airline? Do you want to share your credentials with the airport? And I say, yes. And the data now goes peer-to-peer to the end organization. I have a cryptographic record, what I've been asked, what I've shared. And of course, it's been minimized. They don't need to have everything. So really big questions that are all the non-technical things. What are the standards? Who's going to issue? Trust over IP has been a governing framework for this community around interoperability, not just at the app layer, at the digital wallet, not just credential exchange, but also ledgers. And I won't spend too much time on this. There's many more experts than I am. But in simple terms, we've got the governance, the orange stuff, meaning how do we know what happens if it goes wrong? How do we know who the issuers are? Versus the technology, which is what does interoperability look like? What signature scheme are we going to use? So layer 1 is the ledger, layer 2 is the wallet, layer 3 is credential exchange, data exchange, and layer 4 is the governance and the application ecosystem. So I strongly recommend the audience go and look at trustoverip.org as a whole community of experts looking at interoperability at each of these layers. The reason to say it is that IATA have governance experts. It's what they do. They do assurance to make sure that travel agents are who they say they are. So they have built their own governance stack of which wallets. How are they going to accredit different providers? And this is a vast view of on top of trust over IP, we can overlay different roles. Who are the providers? Who are the auditors? Who's going to run the trust registry of all the issuers? Well, day one, it's IATA. Day one, it's IATA. It's going to be the IATA travel pass, but there can and will and should be other wallets. There can and will and should be other credential exchange solutions. Right now, they launched on Sovereign. Why? Because it's production grade. It's being used. It's the most experienced, I guess, ledger that's out there for consumer grade and enterprise grade deployment. Will it be the only ledger? No. Should it be the only ledger? No. There can and should be others. We'll be working on universal resolvers. Every airline could choose which credential ledger they use. But right now, that's how it's been launched. Now the question is, will there be other wallets? Of course. Will there be other ledgers? Of course. And lastly, we've got a commercial model to think about. Trust over IP has been largely focused on governance, technology. We need to think about the business model layers. Will consumers pay? Will verifiers pay? Is that per transaction? Is it per month? What's the model? It's got to be sustainable, because again, this is a private sector use case. This isn't a government initiative to say, let's issue everyone a passport or a driving license. This has to be a functioning, sustainable commercial ecosystem. So where are we? Travel Pass is being trialed with over 80 airlines. The ones that are going live and being public so far, Qantas is the one I'd highlight out of Australia, but there's also Emirates, Qatar, others in the Middle East, others in Asia Pacific. And it's taken longer than hoped. It's a very complicated ecosystem, lots of policy, lots of governance, lots of politics, capital P, and of course, delays with COVID itself. But this is, I want to remind you, not about COVID. This is about a digital wallet for travelers. That means I can use it for car rental, for hotels, for tickets. I could fly to the Qatar 2022 Football World Cup, use an airline, use my travel pass to fly with the airline, and then land and use that data to share to get into the stadiums. Use it to get into the hotel, use it to rent a car. Back to business requirements. It's got to be resilient. We can't have anyone turn it off. It's got to be compliant. The airlines don't want the data. Great customer experience. We want to enable limitless use cases. If I put my COVID test information or even my passport or anything into a QR code, it solves maybe the customer experience problem. But I've still, like, what else can I do with that QR code? Whereas with a digital wallet, we have many, many more options. And so it becomes a strategic capability. It becomes digital rails for the travel industry. It's not even the end of the beginning for SSI and travel. There are working groups at DIF, the Decentralized Identity Foundation, looking at, SSI for baggage. One of my favorite things about that conversation is, if you look at airports are not designed around people and planes. Airports are designed around baggage and retail. Why does my bag come with me to the airport? If it can have an identifier, its own DID, its own wallet, it can hold credentials. And that becomes really interesting when we think about guardianship and ownership of IoT devices. But it also becomes really interesting because I can have I can redesign the airport. Okay, challenges, and then I'll wrap. COVID-19. We were doing this in the middle of a pandemic, building a globally scalable consumer grade app in multiple languages, in multiple countries. It was challenging, difficult, but also the rules kept changing. Oh, we're going to roll it out or trial it on this route. Ah, well, that country's now stopped accepting passengers because there's been an outbreak. So we'll have to change. And that means we have to change airline. So it's the most unstable, build, measure, learn iteration you can think of. Developing the application. nobody's really done this. I mean, POCs have been and pilots have been run. We have great apps, wallets, interoperability tests. But, the app is on a journey. It's not perfect. But we're doing something pretty advanced with integration into other systems, including this rules engine, Thematic. Do you have the correct credentials? This isn't just issue, hold, verify. We're actually using business requirements to create a specific customer application. And that's been challenging. Normally we would do customer sprints. Normally we do so many more things around the customer. In the middle of a pandemic, when airlines are bleeding cash, very challenging. But I think we have a reasonable, minimal, viable ecosystem. And of course, this isn't just a tablet app kiosk at check-in. This is integrating with departure control systems. This is integrating with airline, this stuff is protected and challenging to change and implement. And we've been working with some fantastic partners. And of course, the commercial model. This has to be sustainable, it has to be global. And IATA have done some really exciting work on the commercial model for enabling them to subsidize some of the transactions so that airlines can get going again. And I think there's a really exciting conversation about how to make this a sustainable commercial ecosystem going forward. I run over time slightly, but maybe we've got 5 minutes for Q&A, for questions and answers. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a privilege to talk to you this afternoon. Would anyone like to discuss, debate, challenge, throw rocks at me?
None of the above, Jamie. Thank you. It was a great presentation. I was musing as you were going through Qantas, and obviously just checked. I'm flying to the UK. Thankfully, the borders are open again sometime this year, we hope. And Qantas will say on their website, just check, the IATA travel pass will be available to use for flights from Australia to the United Kingdom. It isn't at the moment available, and I think although it is technically available, and I think therein lies the rub you're describing, and how much actual operational use has been able to be executed over the last sort of 2 years or so. Is it in active use right now by airlines on flights?
Yes, it's absolutely in active use by airlines. I think one is of the scope of rollout has been handled very carefully by each airline. Some are going as far as, the other solutions like Verify. I upload my documents, I get my green tick and I show it. The travel pass has that capability. So I upload my information, and short of the okay to travel step, I get my green tick and I can show it. So that is being rolled out by airlines and that's being used live. Mm-hmm. Is it being used on every route by every airline that's signed up? Not yet. There is still significant challenges of rollout because we say, well, we're going to use it on this route. And then, of course, either the COVID requirements change or there's an update to the app that says, actually, once we've got this release at the end of the month, then we'll have this capability. And the airline says, oh, we'll wait for that, please. Or there's been app stability issues. It's been a journey. And so there is live use right now. I do know that Air New Zealand is live with it, and they have added the solution that allows you to share the credential ahead of time. But it is early days. It's taken us longer than we hoped as a group to launch it at scale. I think the solution is one. I think this is a kind of tortoise versus the hare. The old children's story that there are a lot of solutions that race to market that I think will solve them, find product market fit perfectly. In terms of IATA's digital wallet ambitions, this is a much longer journey. This is going to take 5, 10, 15 years and is about a verifiable passport. We're not solving for COVID health certificates. for solving for a verifiable passport. And I do know that there is a trial to go, in fact, I won't say which route, but to go fly internationally without having to take your passport out your pocket. Because IATA's vision for this is your face is your boarding pass. Now, do we want biometrics flying everywhere and being requested and shared? Absolutely not. But right now, crossing a border is probably the most privacy invasive thing you can do in your life right now. You know, they have terror lists and watch lists and all sorts of other information lookups. Could I share my biometric, my face, as a credential ahead of time before I've checked in or as I check in, so that the airline is expecting me when I arrive and I can go straight through the plane without touching anything, without taking my passport out of my pocket? That is being trialed right now with the IATA Travel Pass and 3 airlines who are doing multi-leg. This isn't, a lot of the other solutions are working, quote unquote, point to point. If I know the route, I know the requirements, I know you're flying Sydney, London, I'm done. Fantastic. But what if I fly Sydney, Dubai, London? What if I fly on to Canberra? That is the challenge we've got. And so having this this approach is a long game, and it's about governance. You know, they're building a global governance framework, ecosystem framework that has been described for a long time. But you know, this is as complicated, as global, as multi-jurisdictional as you get. I hope I answered your question. It's early days. The volume is not as high yet as we expected, as we hoped, but we're absolutely getting there. And I think, you know, the Emirates and Qantas of the world, once it's turned on, will be, you know, this is going to be on every route. This is not just a kind of point-to-point thing.
Cool. Thank you, Jamie.
Any other questions? And by the way, if you want to email me at the email on the screen, or contact me on Twitter or whatever, my details are there, and I'm happy to carry on the conversation after or offline. Very good. I have a brain full of slides, and I can carry on talking at length to bore everyone, but I'm sure everyone's looking forward to the panel that follows. Are there, you know, do the organizers want to hand over, or would you like me to carry on for a short time, which I'm happy to?